It's April 23rd, 2025. I'm Michael Winkler, here with the Mike Wink Show. Well. We're last, aren't we? I think I'm going to start today's session by talking about Social Security for a little bit. So I had an interesting conversation with one of my more conservative-leaning friends about Social Security. And he brought up all of the classic tropes, the classic counter-arguments for Social Security, like it performs poorly as an investment vehicle compared to the stock market, that it's inherently bad because it's government doing it. It's just so frustrating to see people have like an opinion, a solid, strong opinion about something as important as Social Security, but they don't have an understanding of how Social Security works. Like, he's on one hand simultaneously saying that government doing stuff is inherently bad and that therefore Social Security is bad, but on the other hand also acknowledging like the good that Social Security does. I that it does in fact keep 2/3 of our elderly out of poverty. And he asked me something that I didn't dive into this, but when he said this, I feel like it's so indicative of a certain mindset. And he basically in the middle of it was like sort of implied that this is all based on empathy, right? Like that is the ultimate reasoning behind a program like that. And while I would agree it is, he sees that as a bad thing, which to me is really scary. The fact that the conservative movement has like successfully made the idea of being empathetic as a bad thing, that's like a negative. I understand the mindset that like being too empathetic and blindly so can be a problem. And but that's the case with anything, right? Like that's the case with I mean, you can make that argument with like literally anything. So I don't feel like that means all that much. It's just frustrating to like I'm having this conversation with somebody who's coming from the perspective of government bad, whatever government does is bad. And he doesn't understand that, he doesn't even know that there's a trust fund. He doesn't know anything about Social Security beyond they take the money out of my paycheck and redistribute it, and therefore it's bad because it's a redistributive program. He doesn't even know that there's a trust fund. He doesn't know that the government actually does invest that trust fund money back into its own treasury bonds. Yeah, the yields aren't quite as high as like the stock market would be, but that's part of the appeal of Social Security, is that it is separate. It is immune to the fluctuations of the market. That's why it's not comparable as an investment vehicle. It's because that's not what it is. It's a social insurance program. So like, and at the end of this conversation, he seemed to have like somewhat come around to my side, that actually he seemed to have come into the conversation that Social Security is a bad program, that it is problematic, and that we would be better off if it was eliminated. And I think I maybe changed his perspective to be at least slightly on board with Social Security, or at least understand the pro argument. But it seemed to me like he hadn't even ever heard the pro argument at all. Like that he was just he had only ever he's just basing it totally off of like assumptions and this weird principle that government bad and government doing stuff is bad. It's just frustrating. And I was trying to express this concept to him, right? These last few months have been very radicalizing politically. And I don't mean in terms of like the kind of things I advocate for. I'm talking more in terms of like how I treat other human beings with regards to humanity and empathy. I regard empathy as an important component of building a society that works and a society that is made for human beings, right? That empathy needs to be tempered with a certain amount of practicality and reality, but like the idea that it is an important pillar of building a society. And so lost where I was gonna go with it. Man, I got lines. I gotta I gotta sleep or do something. All right. Yeah, it's me rambling about Social Security. It's just, oh, I remember where I was going. It's just really hard for me to like, for an average everyday person, it's a reasonable defense. Like, I think it's silly, but you can hold a position on Social Security and not understand it, right? And not fully understand how the program works or all the mechanisms of it. And I would argue that's stupid, but you have an excuse, right? You're an everyday person. You have family, you have work, you have school, you friends, your hobbies, right? Like your life doesn't begin and end at understanding Social Security. And so I think it's understandable, at least, when somebody has a misguided interpretation of Social Security. But when you're a billionaire, when you're like one of these oligarchs, one of these people that has tremendous influence over over our politics, over our society and government at large, I think I'm getting to the point now where I'm like, maybe you've lost your humanity card, right? I give everybody an empathy humanity card just by virtue of being a human being. And I would argue that it's almost impossible, if potentially impossible, in with regards to my axioms, to remove that humanity empathy card from them. But when you're billionaire advocating for the removal or reduction of Social Security, when you personally have so much and you are advocating for the like destruction of a program that keeps two-thirds of our elderly out of poverty, that is an extremely successful and popular program, because you want to say, because you don't want to pay that extra $5 or extra 5% payroll tax out of every dollar after $170,000. That's just not. I feel like in that circumstance, you've lost your empathy card, and you could maybe argue, well, why wouldn't the same circumstances that apply to a poor person apply to him, right? He could be misguided. He could be, maybe the way that his parents taught him, or maybe he's taught, for whatever reason, he's been misguided into believing this. I I think that excuse holds up for everybody but billionaires, right? If you're a billionaire, you have the ability to. You, there's an expectation, right? You have more than the ability to gather that knowledge. You have the time, the resources, and if you're going to go so far as to like go out in public and make statements and voice your opinion in a way to try and influence the government and society, you better fucking know how all this shit actually works, all right? And so when you do that, you don't actually know how it works. Yeah. I have a really I want to remove your humanity empathy card, right? Like part of me wants to. I think practically that doesn't work, but like it's so hard for me to want to like it's so hard to be like, "Oh yeah, political assassinations are bad and political violence is bad." Then you have these same people, these same cretins advocating for removing or eliminating, so cutting or eliminating Social Security, and it's like, you understand what I'm going at? I don't know. It's so hard to be like, to try and be objective and level-headed about things like violence when the other side is, I would argue, effectively doing the opposite, right? Like, how is advocating for the removal of Social Security not violence, right? I mean, how is the destitution and and just badness that people are going to experience as a result of removing Social Security, how is that not violent? How is that any different than a person personally going to do those things, personally coming to steal your money, personally coming to break your kneecaps or something? Like, it's beyond the pale. I think, and maybe this is where I can it's annoying always criticizing the Dems, but this is maybe one where the Dems, I don't know. I would say maybe the Dems could do a better job of advocating for empathy as like a principle, but like maybe the well is too poisoned at this point, and that maybe that isn't actually the way to go. I do think there is a way you can sell empathy to the American public in a way and bring it back into the mindset, into the ethos. But I think something more needs to happen. Something it's not going to be easy, right? And I think it's going to be a longer process, but an ultimately very important one if we care about Social Security, or if we care about, you know, maintaining a system of governance that works for everyone. All right, let's move off of Social Security for a bit. So Pope Francis died a few days ago. And unsurprisingly, there have been some mixed reactions. Um, so Pope Francis was notoriously, speaking of empathy, notorious and a bit of a break from pace from the Catholic Church. Um, while different popes have different goals and ideals, this Pope, Pope Francis, has been one of the more quote unquote progressive, or however forward thinking, more modernized popes. He was, as far as I understand, at least tolerant of things like LGBT and gay marriage and things like that. I don't know if he was outright in favor of it. I think maybe he tempered his support a little bit, but he was notoriously um, sort of stepped out of, like, the church is typically the Catholic Church is typically anti-gay marriage, and so for him to not be fervently 100% balls to the wall anti-gay marriage was seen as like him being a radical progressive, lefty or something. And so these I'm going to call them wannabe Catholics, because any real Catholic would defer to the Pope. That's what the whole point of being a Catholic is. That's the difference between Catholicism and Christianity, is that you defer to the Pope as an authority. So I would call any Catholic that was upset with the way this Pope was and then wants a more conservative traditional Pope is not actually a Catholic. They're a fake Catholic or a wannabe Catholic or some sort of American folklore version of Catholicism, because it's not about your opinion personally or whether you like his opinions or not. He's the Pope, and you're supposed to defer to him regardless. He's the voice of God. Are you really questioning God? Yes, they are. And so there's a lot of people that are upset, um, that there's a lot of people that are happy that he's there. So let's read a little bit of this article. As Amazonian bishops gathered at the Vatican on October 21st, 2019, a man entered a nearby church after dawn and stole 3 indigenous statues. Wait, is this the same article? Oh, okay, so this might be an interesting article. As Amazonian bishops gathered at the Vatican on October 21st, 2019, a man entered a nearby church after dawn and stole 3 indigenous statues brought to Rome for the occasion. He threw them into the Tiber River in a videotaped protest to denounce what he called the pagan idolatry taking place on Pope Francis's watch. The incident underscores the lengths to which Pope Francis's traditionalist critics were willing to go to vent their opposition to history's first Latin American pope. For individual protests to social media campaigns, conferences, and petitions, conservatives made clear they believed themselves to be more Catholic than the Pope and forged unusually vocal resistance to his authority. Exactly. This is exactly what I was just saying, that there was a lot of Catholics, I would argue fake Catholics inherently, that are upset with him, even though that doesn't make any sense. It's literally antithetical to the concept of Catholicism. But let's move on. Their token leaders in the College of Cardinals will likely be maneuvering to ensure someone more sympathetic to their sensibilities will be elected to replace Francis, who died Monday at 88. So they're trying to make the church political. Where are the conservative pundits now, huh? Talking about them making church political, huh? Where are they? Well, I guess they're fucking gone. They're not here anymore. Um, yeah, every pope has his critics, and Francis probably expected he would face opposition to his radical reform agenda after Catholics for 2 generations grew used to more conservative popes. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like there's certainly always been opposition to the popes, right? It's not like people have always been fully lockstep supportive of the pope. I'm sure there's always been opposition, but I would question, so like I think maybe a hasty person would say, "Oh, he's this is them getting political. This is Catholics trying to insert politics into the church." Which I'm sure it's not the first example of that happening, right? I mean, I guarantee you there are examples of that happening historically. So I don't want to pretend like this is the first example of this and that they're crossing some line that's never been crossed before. But I think there is a very good argument to be made that um, that this is sort of like if the shoe was on the other foot, they would be very much critical. So I think there's a certain I sense there's a certain level of hypocrisy with their ideals and goals and what they're actually doing here. Some wanted me dead. He equipped once after he heard some prelates in Rome had started plotting a future conclave while he was in the hospital. Francis's critics were unique in having a living alternative Francis's critics were unique in having a living alternate as a point of reference. Benedict the 16th, who resided as Pope Emeritus in the Vatican Gardens for the first decade of Francis's pontificate. Such an anomaly made the dynamics of Francis's opposition a historical first. It exacerbated divisions that experts say must be addressed before another pope decides to step down. They say norms are necessary to prevent retired pope from being an inspiration for the faithful in ways that discredit his successor or impact his leadership. I guess that kind of makes sense. They want consistency, and so they don't want one pope to come in, be pro-gay marriage for example, and then have him retire, and then them put in a new pope who's anti-gay marriage. But this old pope who retired is still alive, and he's still out there uh, on the pulpit, advocating for basically sort of representing the Catholic Church. And so they don't want they don't want that conflict. They want there to be consistency, which seems cynical from a religious perspective. You think God isn't worried about that, or you shouldn't be worried about what God wants, but it makes sense from a practical perspective. If you think of the Catholic Church as a human institution, it makes sense from that perspective. Any company or any organization would probably want the same, right? They want their message to be clear and consistent. Francis tolerated the right-wing opposition for a while, often responding to their attacks with silence. At times, he even seemed to relish in the criticism as evidence of how far a church obsessed with rules and regulations had strayed from Jesus' gospel-mandated call to welcome the stranger, feed the poor, and show mercy to all. Yeah, I think this is a this is a really good point. It seems like modern Catholicism and modern Christianity, in America at least, is almost completely devoid from the principles that they once taught, right? I mean, Jesus was pretty much a straight up socialist, right? So the idea that like they're against government programs, that they're against feeding the poor, that they're generally close-offish, I think is very much antithetical to the teachings of their own religion. And so I think Francis has a really, really good point here that the principles that once defined uh, Christianity and Catholicism, about feeding, welcoming strangers, feeding the poor, showing mercy to all, have seemed to have gone. I guess I don't want to spend too much time talking about the Pope. It's really not that big of a story or that interesting. I think the interesting perspective on this is exactly what I was pointing out, the sort of hypocrisy of that this highlights. The hypocrisy both of Catholics that ostensibly are supposed to support him, and the hypocrisy of conservatives who hold religion as such a important pillar, but then simultaneously ignore all of the teachings of that exact religion in the ways that it should inform their lives. It's like the same people that are like, how can you, I don't understand how you could be a Catholic or a Christian and also in favor of like, you're like a hardcore free market principalist, right? You're like, I don't know how you could advocate, I don't know how you could call yourself Christian or Catholic and advocate for the removal of really any type of social safety net program. I don't I can understand the idea. It's conceivable that somebody both believes in the teachings of Christianity, Catholicism, and God or whatever, and also believes in the principles behind a free market and how it functions. Okay, these two positions can be held simultaneously, but they are inherently at odds. And I would think that any Christian or Catholic worth their salt would believe that would assume that God's directive to show mercy, to welcome in a stranger, to feed the poor and whatnot, far outweighs some practical, everyday market principle position that you hold. Are you saying that your adherence to market principles outweighs God's directive? Are you saying that you shouldn't have food stamps, that you shouldn't feed the hungry on a systemic level because it disrupts the food free market and makes people dependent upon handouts and yada yada yada. These are two. That is where it doesn't make sense. You can believe both of these things, then when the rubber meets the road, when these two come into conflict, I would assume that you would defer to what your God tells you to do and lean towards the more empathetic sort of thing. And obviously, you can implement some practicalities to this. You don't have to go bananas, but like the idea that like you're like, well, yeah, I know God tells me to feed the poor, but and I know we have a program that does that well and does that in a way that would be impossible, in a way and a scale that would be impossible without the government. But I don't care because my belief in the power of the free market outweighs this directive from God. That seems ridiculous. It seems like an absolutely ridiculous position to hold. And I have a feeling if I confronted these same people with this concept that this is the position they're holding, they would reject the idea that this is the position they're holding. But I really don't see any other. I feel like I've laid this out as objectively and cleanly as I can. I don't really see how there's any way they could argue that that's not what is happening or that's not what they're doing. I I, I can't even think of any meaningful response they could possibly have to that. All right. All right. Now let's move on to Eric Adams and the modern 2025 Watergate we just had. So I'm gonna fill y'all in, anybody who isn't familiar, because there's so much going on. It's impossible to keep track of everything, and this just gets buried. So when Watergate happened, the Nixon campaign was caught trying to spy on, I can't remember the name of the opposition, but the Dems. They were trying to spy on the Democratic Party at the Watergate Hotel, and they were caught doing this, and charges were being levied against Nixon. Well, Nixon won and takes office, and he directed the Attorney General. He said, "Hey, Attorney General, man, tell your prosecutors to drop these corruption charges against me. Tell them to drop the investigation into the Watergate scandal against me entirely." And the idea is that if he's the president and he has power over the attorney general, then he can do that. Well, the problem with that is that our federal legal system is supposed to be separate from politics. So when he does that, that is completely, and obviously in reality, I think there's more link there than people would like there to be. But when the link is often kind of hidden or subtle or quiet, this is a direct this was a direct conflict in that. And the prosecutors at the time, the actual like lawyers who are working on this case, who were going to prosecute him, said no, that's ridiculous. We're not going to do that. We're not just going to fucking drop the case because you want us to. That's not how this is supposed to work. And so 8 or 9, I can't remember, they called it the Saturday Night Massacre. 8 or 9 different prosecutors, one after the other, resigned. Because if the attorney general comes to you and tells you to do something and you say, I'm not going to do that, they're going to say, look, you can either do it, resign, or we're going to fire you. Those are the 3 options you have. So, and good on them, all these 7 or 8 prosecutors, they all resigned. And so this was such a this was potentially even bigger scandal than the actual spying at Watergate Hotel itself. It's the fact that he tried to use the power of the presidency to cover up crimes he committed, and then furthermore used it to um, uh, basically he So that is actually the biggest reason, one of, if not the biggest reason he eventually resigned, was because they knew they were going to impeach him. He knew that he was going to be impeached on this. He knew once this got to Congress that there's no question that they would have impeached him for him trying to smash his own corruption charges. Well, we're back then people had a sense of shame, right? I'm not going to pretend like the parties were objective, good faith actors then and that they aren't now, but they were closer to being a good faith actor like that. And I think that there was enough of a sense of shame that the Republicans would have impeached him had it gotten to that point. But um, that's not the case anymore. I don't think there's no backstop anymore. That shame acted as a sort of backstop, and that ultimately, as a result of him doing this bad action, him trying to uh, kill the case against himself, he was essentially forced to resign. It's not the case anymore. There is absolutely nothing Donald Trump could do to get the Republican Party to impeach him. There's nothing he could do. And so there's no backstop anymore. So we just had another Saturday Night Massacre. So we have quid pro quos for all of this. None of this is conjecture. None of this is like opinion or anything. This is all like clear, established fact that the Trump campaign during this 2024 run coordinated with Eric Adams of New York to try and push his immigration agenda. They were doing that whole thing where they were like singing immigrants from Texas and Florida up to New York or whatever, that kind of stuff. They said, in exchange for you supporting our immigration policy during the campaign, if we win, we will drop the corruption charges against you. Now, right now, there are quite a few corruption charges against Mayor Eric Adams, and we'll get into those charges in a second. But the details behind the charges aren't really important for what we're discussing right now. So uh, he so obviously the Trump team won, and then Trump directed the attorney general that he appointed to tell the prosecutors to drop the case against Mayor Eric Adams, and the case has been started under the Biden administration. So when the attorney general comes to these prosecutors and says, "Hey, you guys need to kill this case. We promised Eric Adams they would." They, just like they did, and rightfully so, during the Saturday Night Massacre and the Nixon administration, said, "Guys, we can't. That's not how this works. All right, we can't do that. That's messed up. No." And so you get the 3 options, right? Do what we're in there. And when the attorney general tells you to do something, you do what he asks, you resign, or you're fired. And so I don't know exactly how many resigned. I thought it was like 10, but maybe it's only 3 or 4. Says 3 more prosecutors resign in aftermath of dismissal. So we're gonna get into this article a little bit, but basically everything I've laid out so far is the TLDR of the article, and that he and that basically we just had a Saturday Night Massacre. We had the true corruption part of the Watergate scandal, the part that was really problematic and eventually led to Nixon resigning. We just had that, but it's, I would argue, so much worse because there's no backstop. There used to be a backstop. There used to be shame, humility, the parties being closer to being good faith. But that's not the case anymore. There's no backstop. He could do this exact same thing 10 times worse. He could do this he could do this the same Watergate scandal every fucking day and nobody would say anything. The Republicans have no spine or backbone or any principles really at all anymore. And so they're just purely the party of being sycophantic to Trump. And so I think this is so much worse and this is really scary. And it's also one of those things that's like it really easily passes under the radar, and that's also really scary, right? It's a very it's a very complicated technical thing that ultimately requires a deep understanding of not only it requires a deep understanding of um, not only the legal system, but like you have to be researched on this, right? This takes some this is not a surface level thing people can digest in about 5 seconds. It takes a deeper explanation to understand the situation. And so it's really I think it's actually so much worse than the Saturday Night Massacre during the Nixon administration. All right. So let's move on to read a bit of this article. So I haven't seen an update on this case in a few days. So hopefully this will have some new information for me. 3 more federal prosecutors who had been involved in the now dismissed corruption case against the New York Eric. Oh, so they did finally. So I figured that's where it would end. I figured they would just get some prosecutor to just go ahead and do it. Eventually, they're going to find someone. And so I figured that's where it ended, that they would just go ahead and dismiss it and that it would just, everybody would just go to under the rug. Nobody remembers it. Everybody sort of, there's so much going on. Nobody notices. So it looks like that's at least partially what happened. Case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams resigned on Tuesday. Wait, 3 more federal prosecutors who had been involved in the now dismissed corruption case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams resigned on Tuesday, saying they felt pressured into admitting wrongdoing or regret as a condition for being reinstated to their jobs. Saying they felt pressured into admitting wrongdoing or regret as a condition for being reinstated to their jobs. We will not confess wrongdoing when there was none. Celia Cohen, Andrew Robox, and Derek Wickstrom wrote in a letter to Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. The 3 assistant U.S. attorneys had been placed on leave after a number of prosecutors in New York and Washington refused to follow orders to end the case against Adams, a Democrat. The letter was published by several news outlets. Its authenticity was confirmed to the Associated Press by a person who received the letter. The resignations came the same day that Jay Clayton, former chairman of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, was sworn in as the New York office's new top prosecutor. Adams was indicted last year, accused of taking illegal campaign contributions and travel perks from a Turkish official and others seeking to buy influence when he previously served as Brooklyn Borough President. In February, after President Donald Trump took office, the Justice Department ordered then-acting U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Daniel Sassoon, to drop the charges against Adams, not due to the merits of the case, but rather so the mayor could assist in the Trump administration's immigration agenda. Exactly what I was saying. There was a quid pro quo between the Trump campaign and Eric Adams, and about the immigration. Sassoon opted to resign instead, as did several other career prosecutors who objected to the criminal case being dismissed for political reasons. The case was eventually dismissed in April, so they did eventually get around to dismissing it. I'll maybe take a look at this in a minute. Some more details on that. Cohen, Rohrbach, and Wickstrom wrote in their resignation letter that it had become clear to them that one of the preconditions Blanche placed on them returning to work was to express regret and admit some wrongdoing by the office in connection with the refusal to move to dismiss the case. Oh my God. Wait a minute. Express regret and admit some wrongdoing by the office in connection with the refusal to move. Oh my God. So there, wait. Had decided that obedience supersedes all else, requiring us to abdicate our legal and ethical obligations. And so, wait a minute. Oh my God. Yeah. So based on this, it looks like what happened was the Attorney General Blanche came to them and said, "Drop this case." They said, "No, that's insane. We're not going to do that." And then Blanche said, I guess maybe he put them on leave or something. I guess he put them on leave. Like I guess he put them on suspension or parole or something. And then they resigned themselves. So he basically sidelined them. So he was like, "So you're our first string prosecutor. You're supposed to handle this case. You're saying you're not going to do what we want you to do. We're going to bench you basically and bring in our second string, our next in line prosecutor to take care of this." And I guess they were saying that they maybe gave them the option to come back from being benched, but they had to admit that them refusing to try the case was wrong. They have to express regret and admit some wrongdoing by the office in connection with the refusal to move to dismiss the case. That is sick. That is sick. That is so gross. Oh my God. Are you serious? Not only did they ask them to do something ridiculous and then have them resign, they had the fucking, like, the cojones. They had the lack of shame to not only, like, to try and make them apologize. They tried to make them apologize. That's insane, bro. Holy shit. What the fuck? The new leaders of the Justice Department, they wrote, had decided that obedience supersedes all else, requiring us to abdicate our legal and ethical obligations in favor of directions from Washington. That is wrong. Yeah, this seems like it's pretty wrong to me. Blanche said in a statement that there was nothing illegal or unethical about dismissing the flawed prosecution against Mayor Adams. I have a sneaking feeling that if the shoe was on the other foot, that if it was a DeSantis who cut some deal with the Biden administration, that they were going to, I cut some corruption charges or something. I'm sure the right wing, quote unquote, the conservatives, these clowns would be fucking losing their minds. So like, I think any normal person, I think you guys should know this, that like it's important to ask the question, what if Biden did this? What if Harris did this? What if Trump did this? So you're being objective with the way that you're handling this. You're not holding people to double standards. But like these people are they think of it as a game, right? That is a mindset, that is an egalitarian academic mindset. One that is premised on us working together to reach the pinnacle, the proper uh, conclusion through our joint efforts. But that's not how I feel like a lot of conservatives and right wingers see it. They see it as like a team game. They've determined that they like this team more, the right wing conservative Republican team, and that they're gonna do, and that within that context of it being a team game, pretty much anything is fair game. That is not. I think of it as something. I try and come at this altruistically from a top down perspective, but they're coming at it from a team cynical. It doesn't matter. All that matters is the ends sort of thing, which is respectable in a way, but also disgusting in another way. It's respectable in a practical kind of way. You'll get more of your shit done, and maybe the Dems could learn some lessons from that mindset. But it's also disgusting because you're putting your team, this idea of a team sport basically, over your empathy and humanity and care for your fellow human beings by virtue of supporting or not supporting good and bad programs. Any suggestion to the contrary by anybody, especially former federal prosecutors, is wrong and disingenuous, he wrote. Mille Beauvais, then the acting the then the acting well, that's weird. Mille Beauvais, then the acting deputy attorney general, had argued previously that Adams was being prosecuted because he had criticized former President Joe Biden's immigration policies. Wait, what? The then acting deputy attorney general, in dismissing the case, Judge Dale E. Ho noted that the record showed the prosecutors who worked on the case had followed all guidelines. There is no evidence, zero, that they had any improper motives, Ho wrote in his ruling. So even the judge himself was like, this is complete nonsense, guys. What are you doing? I think there's only a certain amount that he can really call them out like that, but like this is a clear what's the word I'm looking for? Rejection of this whole concept. There's no evidence, zero, that they had any improper motives. So yeah, they're arguing that the prosecutor. So they're cynically arguing. Seriously, they're cynically arguing that the case in the first place was only because he went against Joe Biden, and that they're doing the right thing by dropping it. That it was a political prosecution in the first place, and that they're only being the good guys and dropping it. That is, it sickens me that they're able to do this sort of thing, like make this absolute fabrication, like out of complete thin air, and that people are just gonna fucking eat it up without looking into it at all. Something I keep thinking about these last two election cycles is the concept of curiosity. I like to think of myself as a curious person, right? Like, to me, it's important to be consistent, right? To for my ideology and the things I advocate for to make sense. And as a result, whenever I hear something that counters opinions that I have or positions that I think are correct, I'm immediately like, I want to know what that is. I am desperate. I'm almost desperate to be proven wrong, because if I'm proven wrong, then that means I have entered a higher level of understanding, right? Every time you're proven wrong, you're essentially reaching a higher level of understanding, because you don't lose the understanding and interpretation that you had before your opinion was changed. So I I feel like I'm naturally very curious when it comes to those kind of things, but I feel like so many people I've talked to, there's a fundamental lack of this curiosity, that if you that like they'll say something like they'll say something to indicate they're against something. I'm hyper focused on Social Security, so let's say Social Security. They say something to indicate that they're against Social Security and that they think it's bad, and then I say something to them that counters that maybe fundamentally questions one of their premises or something, and makes them, and it seems like it connects with them, and it seems like they understand what I'm saying and it makes sense. Then they don't really have any curiosity to go further, right? If that was me, I'd be like, oh my God, this fundamentally changes how I look at this problem, and maybe will cause me to completely reevaluate it. And I feel like I need to take a step back and do some research before I then present my opinion, or I need to rework, I need to mold my opinion. These people, I feel like so many of them don't have that desire, right? I tell them this thing that completely upends what they're advocating for, and they just kind of go, okay. And then they never look more into it. And then I guarantee you they go and talk to one of their other friends about the exact same thing, not incorporating what I told them at all. And I'm not saying that as like they need to listen to me. What I'm saying is important. What I'm saying is that, like, there's a certain lack of curiosity, right? This lack of curiosity, I think, is really problematic, and really, like, I don't know where it comes from, but I feel like there's a strand of is like, and I think this lack of curiosity can manifest. It's not only on the right. I think you can see it on the left as well. I think a great example of where you can see it on the left is with Israel and Gaza, that people are just sort of, so I feel like this lack of curiosity can be seen like in almost every single aspect of politics. When viewed through the right wing American right wing lens, right now, modern 2025, I think um, there is almost no issue in which I see consistent curiosity. Um, on the left, I see the same. I don't see it as, it's not as ubiquitous, but one issue where I do see it quite a lot is with Israel Gaza. Um, there seems to be a lack of curiosity or a lack of interest in pushing back or doing more research, pushing back on certain claims made or research made, or when you have somebody come on and state an opinion or make claims that are counter to, maybe you believe there's a genocide going on in Gaza, and that somebody comes on and makes statements that counter that. They reference historical events, they talk about modern political climate in Israel, whatever. They present something and they present a countering argument and reasoning behind it. I feel like there is this strain of just immediate dismissal and almost like anger at the idea that you're even questioning the idea that that you're even talking about the idea that there's a genocide. That they the this strand of anti-curiosity is manifests itself in this lack of questioning and this lack of interest in molding their opinion. They just sort of take it as gospel. But I don't know. I Something I keep thinking about is this lack of curiosity I see in so many people that label themselves as conservative and right wingers, that it's just like, I feel like there's some fundamental reason why, right? There I feel like there just has to be, because so many of these people I feel like show that curiosity and desire to grow in other aspects of their life. Like, for instance, one of my close conservative friends is an electrical engineer, and I'm not an electrical engineer, so I can't really assess whether he's a good or a bad one. But he does well at his company. He's been there a while. He's moved up. It seems, and whenever I hear him talk about it and hear other people talk to him about stuff, seems like he's a pretty smart guy, and he knows what he's talking about, and he shows that desire to want to get smarter and get better and build on the knowledge that he has. So when he's presented with something, like he thinks there's a right way to do something and then he's presented with a different way to do it, he doesn't like dismiss it. He's like, oh, he takes that in and uses it as a way to grow and become a better electrical engineer as a result. But he doesn't do the same thing for politics, right? He'll make some claims that I think are just objectively wrong and off base, like the claims that like that Democrats want to take guns away, right? That they want to take all your guns away. He legitimately believes that. And then when I say, I've got him off this idea that the Dems want open borders, but he used to believe that too, that the Dems want open borders. Like, and so then he must have heard that somewhere. And so when I present to him reasoning why that isn't the case, he he was initially just sort of like, like, I don't, he didn't take it in. He wasn't interested in taking it in the same way that he would a piece of engineering knowledge or something. Even though what I was presenting to him was like, I don't know. It's just frustrating to see this lack of curiosity. Um, and I think it's something worth discussing, because it's only a good trait, right? I can only think of positive things that come as a result of having this curiosity that I speak of. But what was the thing I brought over? So, all right. So what do we want to talk about now? Do we want to talk about tariffs, or do we want to talk about something a bit more fun? Let's go a bit more fun right now. The tariffs will be there. The tariffs will be there tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So I will forget about this piece of more fun info. So I used to watch iDubbbz when I was younger. Okay. I used to watch that whole gaggle of idiots. The iDubbbz, Max Mofo, Filthy Frank. anything for views. Those guys making silly videos. They do them on their individual channels, but they'd also work together and make group stuff. And some of the stuff was almost all very silly, pointless, just like not even slightly a hint at politics. Um, just good fun. And when I was younger, and maybe I was just the right age for it. I would argue it's pretty juvenile humor. But I was in high school, and I thought it was great, and I loved it. Um, Over the years, iDubbbz's content has changed quite a bit. His style of content. He's had long periods where he hasn't uploaded, um, and a lot of people are upset with the direction that he's taken. Right? He's taken a less silly juvenile direction and has definitely tried to get a bit more serious. And I have some mixed opinions about some of this content, some of this new content. I think it's mostly okay. Some better videos are better than others, and there's been a handful of videos where I'm like, I don't really think this was a great one. Like he did some fucking he made an arcade machine. He made a Super Monkey Ball arcade machine, or he made like these rubber popping toys or some fidget toys or something. I thought those videos were kind of boring and stupid. But he's not a complete idiot, right? He can talk about some of this stuff. So yeah, he's changed his content over the years. I mostly, I'll watch it every now and then. If he uploads a new video once every couple months, I guess I'll throw it on. It's a couple minutes. But there's recently been a spat with H3H3 and iDubbbz. I don't want to get too deep into the drama. You can go to their channels and get a breakdown of all the nonsense. But basically, it seemed to me like, from my perspective, from an outside perspective, it seems to me like as if H3H3 started this political talk show a few years ago, in much the same way that iDubbbz did. He kind of turned into more serious content, but H3H3 was more deliberate with it, right? He went in a very deliberate politics direction. iDubbbz sort of vaguely went more serious and politicky, but not as deliberately. That's very much what H3H3 did. And I think, and he's been, I don't know all his opinions. I really didn't watch him at all, actually. But he had mostly progressive left-wing takes, pretty standard centrist-y left-wing, right-wing, left-wing progressive takes. But then October 7th happens, the attack in Israel, and he, in the fallout, in the weeks following, he showed, I'm pretty sure, that's right around the time where it really started to solidify this whole, there's a genocide in Gaza. My understanding, we can, somebody who's more of an expert on this maybe could comment. My understanding is that he came out and basically was just sort of like, yeah, maybe they're going too far, but Israel has a right to defend itself and yada, yada, yada. I mean, he came out as basically against what Israel is. He had a nuanced opinion, right? He came out against what Israel was doing to the extent that they're going too far, but he also acknowledged that Israel is a very different country than all of the surrounding Middle Eastern countries. And so to think of them as the same would be stupid. And so he acknowledges that Israel, as much as a lot of people want to make them a boogeyman, they are a liberal Western-style democracy, unlike in a way that none of the countries around them are. And that if you go there yourself, which I have been there, you will realize that it is much more like a Western country. It's much more like being in the US or Europe than it is being in fucking Saudi Arabia or something, okay? It's an interesting blend, but that's not the point. The point is that he came out as, he has some ties to Israel and whatnot, and so he came out as being somewhat not playing both sides, but I feel like having a nuanced opinion on this, right? And sort of this anti-intellectual strain that I mentioned really showed its head, and I feel like people are trying to. So it seems to me that the vast majority of H3H3's audience is very left wing, and that they are convinced that there is a genocide in Gaza going on without question, without any further discussion or debate, and that anything short of a full-throated, there's a full genocide going on, and saying things like Israel doesn't have a right to exist and yada yada yada, which of course it does. That's ridiculous. Um, but anything short of that was seen as being basically one of the genociders themselves. And so then basically I think they tried to a lot of these anti-curious extreme lefties, extreme right wing or extreme anti-Israel people, because I don't want to call them lefties. It's not just left wing necessarily. You could be right wing and be anti-Israel or believe there's a genocide going on and be against it or whatever. There's all sorts of different positions you can hold to be, to be logically against what's going on. It seems to me like they're trying to disguise this disagreement as like they're basically using it as an excuse to be mean to him, right? And like he's an internet personality and he's rich. And so like I don't have a ton of sympathy for them being mean to him online, but like it did seem like this all stemmed from H3H3's video calling out Hassan. And Hassan is not a super savory character. He supports terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and I feel like doesn't have a great historical understanding of the situation, does not speak like somebody who has ever been to Israel or spoken to Israelis before. And so, um, I think iDubbbz is unfortunately one of these bananas, just out of his mind, lack of curiosity lefties, or just people. How do I keep saying lefties? That is convinced, full stop, without any discussion, that there is a genocide going on in Israel, and that it's so bad that anybody, like I said, anybody who's anything short of basically saying Israel shouldn't have the right to exist, they see as an enemy. And so when H3 made this really good video calling out Hassan and all of his ridiculous nonsense, iDubbbz got upset. I think really what happened is iDubbbz likes H3, disagreed with his take on this, and then used these like things that H3 has said about him and Anissa, his girlfriend, as an excuse to like attack him, basically. I mean, attack him. It's internet stuff, right? And they're both getting publicity from this. It's all one big marketing ploy. I'm not convinced that they aren't actually on the same page and that they know what they're doing, and really this is all just a big way to get them both more views. Because really that's what this will result in, right? People will go and watch H3's video about Hassan, and then they'll watch iDubbbz's video about H3, and then they'll watch Hassan reacting to all of them, and blah, blah, blah. And so, like, this is wholly a very unserious thing. I just think it's sort of it's disappointing to see iDubbbz create that video, because I think the reasoning and points made in iDubbbz's response to H3 was really not great. I think most of the criticisms were pretty poor. And I think it really it felt kind of sloppy. Like, it felt like slop. H3H3's video on Hassan felt very meticulously put together. It felt well researched. They spent a lot of time doing it. iDubbbz felt like this was much more hasty. It was much more personal. And honestly, as a result, I feel like I've lost a little bit of respect for iDubbbz. I'm not saying I won't ever watch his content again, but now I'm a bit more skeptical. The fact that he's more interested in associating himself with guys like Hassan and Frogan and some of these other weirdos instead of iDubbbz, a guy he's been friends with for a long time, instead of H3, a guy who's been friends with for a long time. You can look back and see videos they made fucking 10 years ago together, okay? It just seems like really short-sighted, and it's just kind of disappointing. To me, it seems like H3 came off the clear winner in this interaction, and that iDubbbz did nothing but hurt his reputation and make him seem like a weird little weirdo. Alrighty. That was. It has been April 23rd, 2025. And that's all she wrote, folks.